attending. Thanks so much for joining us today. Um, from hopes and dreams to revenue and expenses, leading a collaborative budget process with Jackie Safola and Andrea Shapiro. So thankful for them offering this presentation. So my name is Bob Green. I am a consultant and coach in the Boston area, and also a board member of Nonprofit Net. And as we get started, just a quick shout out to a couple of my Nonprofit Net colleagues, Laura Cook, who is behind the scenes doing all the important work with the tech and everything else. And also just to Dora Wang, who really organizes this series of webinars and does so much work to make it happen. Go on to the next slide, please, Laura. Um, actually, Laura, one back, please. Terrific. So again, Nonprofit Net is a small organization. A couple of reminders, please take a moment to complete the survey that will show up when you leave at the end of the webinar. Consider a donation if possible, a small one at some point. The QR code here will bring you to the donations page, and I put a link in the chat. And just help us spread the word. These webinars are a free service to the community. So please be on our mailing list and let people know about them on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Okay, Laura, next slide, please. And a word about Nonprofit Net of Greater Boston. We are a small but mighty organization that helps nonprofits in terms of supporting their efforts. And we do this in a variety of ways, encouraging to build expertise and encourage connections through expert-led seminars like this one. We have a leadership acceleration program, and we do networking forums. So be sure, and a wonderful newsletter. So please make sure you're on our mailing list and keep up with all the great things that we are doing. All right. And next month, webinar will be from Stephanie Page, Executive Director of the Sacred Threads Center, on nurturing spiritual well-being in our lives and organizations. And our webinars cover a wide range of topics. So please, I hope you keep up with them, and we hope to see you again. So that's next Tuesday, March 10th at 1 o'clock. Housekeeping for today. Feel free to ask questions by putting your questions in the chat. And as possible, our presenters will respond to them as possible. And certainly by the end, there'll be a Q&A. And again, we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. But at that point, when the presenters ask for it, you can also use the virtual hand raise feature and to raise your hand. We also want to encourage you, if possible, to keep your cameras on during the webinar. And I know some people prefer not to do that, but if it's okay with you, please do keep your cameras on. It does foster a sense of community. And the next slide. Great. And again, after this session, an evaluation, a very brief evaluation will pop up. Please take a moment and fill that out. Also, you will receive an email with the PDF presentation and a handout as part of that PDF. The recording will also be on the nonprofitnet.org website in the on-demand library. All right. So, introducing our speakers for today, Jackie Safola. Since 2011, Jackie has worked as a consultant to nonprofit leaders, specializing in business development of collaborative services, spaces, and strategies. She is fortunate to work with many clients of multiple years, and in some cases, multiple startups. She holds an MBA with a focus on operations and strategy. Andrea Shapiro is inspired by collaborating with organizations and leaders to build and create equity, justice, and community. With more than 30 years experience as a nonprofit staff member, leader, advisor, combined with a BA in psychology and an MBA with a finance concentration, Andrea makes financial management accessible and empowering. And her work is also informed by her experience as the founder and CEO of Second Chances, a nonprofit clothing donation program she's managed for more than 2 decades. On a personal note, I'm going to share that I've known Jackie and Andrea professionally for many years and greatly appreciate their commitment and insights. And I recently donated clothes to Second Chances, which is doing such wonderful work. So I'm also really looking forward to their sharing their wisdom with all of us. All right, so we're going to turn it over now to Andrea and Jackie. So give us a moment to change who's sharing, and thank you all very much.
All right, can everyone see my screen? We good on the slides? Awesome, thank you. I'm Andrea Shapiro, and I'm here with my colleague Jackie Safola for, as Bob mentioned, From Hopes and Dreams to Revenue and Expenses, a collaborative and empowering conversation about leading a budget process. And we're really excited to share some ideas with you and inspire one another. I'm going to give a quick overview of the workshop. We'll first go over some goals. We'll do a brief welcome and reintroduce ourselves. We'll talk about some ground rules. We will talk about our relationships with money and how that impacts the work that we're all doing. And then we'll get into the depth of organizational budgeting, short group activity and discussion, and then we'll do some wrap up and questions. And we are just excited to be here today and thrilled that you've joined us. This webinar focuses on how our relationships with money, both personal and professional, can play into organizational financial management, and talks a little bit further about how we can evolve our relationship to serve our organizations and empower staff, boards, and our community. We see the budget process as a way to engage leadership, board, and staff in mission dreaming and sustainability planning. A participatory budget process gains input from a variety of stakeholders and builds organizational financial knowledge, making the numbers more accessible and more useful to folks. Budgeting can also grow our personal comfort and skill with financial management, which can benefit our organizations in the long run. So the goals of the workshop are to learn more about budgeting that supports organizational vision and capacity, to understand that the budget is a way of communicating programmatic and operational plans and priorities, and to see how the budget process can allow space for real conversations about money, to grow trust and build financial awareness and personal agency within the organization. As Bob adeptly introduced us, I'm just going to tell a little bit more about why this work is important to me personally. This work resonates for me because in my work with organizations that are building more equity in our community, I've observed a desire to empower staff, board, and stakeholders by truly sharing responsibility for organizational financial health. And that requires organizations to build more understanding around the resources needed to operate. And turn it over to Jackie. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Hi. My name is Jackie Safola. Bob and Nonprofit Net, thank you so much for hosting us today. I really appreciate it. I just checked the participant count and we have 51 people on this Zoom call about budgeting, which I feel like must be a world record or something. It's amazing. So thank you to all of you for joining in. I am just going to quickly mention the reason that I am really excited to work on this today is because I believe that all of the organizations that you represent are providing critical missions to the communities that you serve. And I also think that you, as leaders, are experts in what you do. You have critical knowledge that should impact the strategic and budgetary operations of your organizations. And lastly, I see a budget as a strategic process that can really engage people in better understanding what you do, why you do it, and how you do it. So I'm really into budgets. Let's go to the next slide. Just super quick. If you joined a couple minutes into the presentation, please take an opportunity to just type into the chat your name, the organization that you represent, and introduce yourself to everybody. And I'll quickly go over some ground rules. So please just try to be present and engage in thinking and in the discussion. We really encourage you to take space and make space for others as well. And know that incomplete thoughts are totally okay. And relatedly, we do not expect everyone to have the same financial vocabulary, and we don't want the words to get in the way. So please tell us what you're thinking. We also want you to understand that this is a pretty complex subject. We only have about 40 minutes. So we see this as the beginning of a longer conversation, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. Lastly, I just want to mention this conversation is being recorded. And so with that in mind, please do not discuss anything that might be sensitive or confidential within your organizations, as this will be recorded and available to others who might be viewing in the future. So thank you. And I'll let Andrea talk to us about what we often see with traditional budgeting.
Thanks, Jackie. So if folks can raise their Zoom hands in this part, tell me how you feel when I say some of these words. Raise your Zoom hand if any of these descriptions of a traditional budget process resonate. Intimidating, autocratic, stifling, uncreative, boring, scary. All right. Thanks, folks. I see some hands. What we often see with traditional budgeting is a budget that's set by leadership, approved by the board, and with limited staff engagement. We don't often have the opportunity to have a budget for dreaming or experimentation or ideas gathered from our community and staff. And sometimes budgets aren't used as a strategic tool, they're just adjusted annually for inflation or changes in programming. And when we have budgets like that, staff doesn't have the ability to grow understanding of the business model, how the money flows in, and how the money relates to programming and operations. Sometimes we have an overestimation of what's possible, and sometimes we have the opposite, which is catastrophic thinking and worry about what might happen within the organization. And we foster, with closed budget processes like this, fear and anxiety and secrecy. So we're going to talk more about why this matters. Jackie and I both are very enthusiastic about using financial management and budgeting as an empowering and engaging tool for organizations. It's really important for board members and the CEO and staff as well to have a shared vocabulary and a good understanding of organizational finances. And we recognize that new and emerging leaders might not have the same tools and vocabularies that departing leaders had. And it's important for board and staff and leadership to work together and figure out how a new leader can acquire the skills and the financial management aptitude to be able to lead the organization and communicate priorities and engage with the community. It's also really important and valuable for staff to be able to understand how their programs fit within the organizational budget and the overall financial picture. For example, we sometimes see with boards where a board member will suggest a new programmatic priority, and what we want to help to impart to board members and others who might think this is something that they should be doing, that they also need to understand the financial implications of those actions. And it's really empowering when a board and staff and CEO can work together to build budgets and programs that reflect what the needs are of the community. So when an ED or a CEO comes back to staff and says, we can't do that right now because it's not financially possible, the staff can understand why that's not financially possible at this point in time. And hopefully we'll learn more through this process. Staff can contribute to making that possible. By developing a shared understanding about organizational budget and financial management, everyone we include in that process becomes a partner in the organization's success. A more participatory budget engages everyone, leadership, board, and staff, in the dreaming and the sustainability of the organization while sharing responsibility for the ongoing management of outcomes and budgets. It builds the organization's financial knowledge internally so that the numbers are more accessible to folks, and that builds trust and buy-in and strengthens the organizational culture. And it allows us to have conversations about money that grow our individual comfort and skill with financial management, which builds people's leadership and personal agency and better prepares folks for future leadership opportunities.
I'm just going to emphasize a point that Andrea just mentioned about emerging leaders. The next generation of leadership, so board members, executives, volunteers, they're going to be coming into their positions possibly with different access to financial training, education, knowledge, also different levels of comfort working with finances, working with budgets. So we just want to emphasize that there's a real need for more intentional onboarding and professional development for new leaders that are coming in, new board members that are coming on, just to ensure that everyone involved has the same understanding and context for financial decision making. This kind of onboarding is also meant to empower everyone to be confident and comfortable contributing to the organization's financial health and management through a more participatory budget process. So in talking about participatory budgeting, it's really important to understand that we are bringing our whole selves to the table when we engage in budgeting. And our whole selves are influenced by past experiences with money. Many of us in the nonprofit sector have experienced financial insecurity personally. And many of us have experienced or are experiencing financial insecurity professionally within our organizations. So from these and other past experiences, when we talk about money, we can often react in ways that are based in the past, not necessarily based in the reality. And so sometimes in budget processes, what we see are people who are approaching the process with scarcity thinking, which is believing that resources are scarce and limited, and that there has to be a competition for resources. It's almost a fight kind of response. We also see people who really tend to avoidance, and we call it head in the sand. There's just this desire to hide from the budget process and not participate in it. We also see a false sense of oversecurity sometimes. So overestimating what's possible. And we call that blue sky financing. So I'm thinking that this probably sounds familiar to many of you. In addition, there can also be perfectionism about getting the numbers exactly right. There also can be guilt involved. There also can be over rationality. So saying, it's just a budget, it's just a bunch of numbers, it doesn't matter. Um, and in general, a desire to do the budget as quickly as possible and move on. And I think that part of what's happening with all of this is that money brings up a lot. And with participatory budgeting, there are more people at the table who are bringing their own experiences to that table. So I don't know, as I'm talking through this, I would just ask, to yourself, like think of a time when your past experiences with money, either personal or professional, might have affected a work-related financial decision. Just think about that. And, as you think about it, maybe recognize that others who are participating go through the same thing themselves. We're all in this together. But the good news is when we create a more participatory approach to budgeting, we can also create a different space to talk about money. And that can be a space that allows us to talk about money in a more healthy and realistic way.
Thanks, Jackie. I just want to emphasize the point that I think when we start this process within organizations, it's really important to acknowledge that the personal impacts and to recognize within ourselves the tendency to draw from our personal financial experiences and how that affects our ability as managers. So we, as we've said from the beginning, we think that budgeting can be empowering and engaging, and we hope that this will convince you as well. We're not going to get into spreadsheets, and I think that takes away some of the fear for people like me who don't really love spreadsheets. But what I really do like is this process where we get to do a very iterative process where we do some dreaming about vision and long-term capacity. This is the fun part. This is where we get to consider the what ifs and center on our vision for the organization and preparing for the future and bringing others into that process. The experience of program managers, the experience of clients, the experience of our community, and then doing some planning, establishing goals, prioritizing what we want to accomplish and how we'll succeed. And then, I just want to also note that ideally the dreaming and planning inform the financial estimates. We struggle with this balance, but the financial estimates in an ideal world won't drive the dream, but they influence the plan. And then understanding and managing revenue and expenses, and helping our teams to understand how to manage and understand how the money comes in and goes out of the organization. And then making adjustments for realities, making sure that the revenue meets the expenses, doing long-term planning so that we can make investments that require time and fundraising and all of those activities, and acknowledging that unexpected things like a pandemic can happen and we need to adjust for those things. So if you have some thoughts on this in the chat, could you share a little bit about when you think about a budget process within your own organization, which of these pieces of the process excites you the most? And or thinking of your last budget process, which of these areas did your organization focus on? And Jackie's going to go into more depth about the process in the next slide.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, so Andrea just gave us a really great overview of a more participatory budget process. But admittedly, as someone who loves spreadsheets, I jumped in with this slide of like, let's get more details so folks really understand what we're talking about and what that process might look like. So starting with the dreaming. So again, this is thinking about the what ifs, what's possible, right? We start with pre-work. So the pre-work is at a personal level, thinking about your experience with money and also the beliefs and training that you have and how that might influence your approach to the budget process. Also for dreaming, this is an opportunity to think about your organization's vision and ask, how does the budget support our shared vision? I also want to say it's important to think about your vision as well as your values and make sure that the budget process that you're outlining is consistent with the values and the vision that you hold. And if it's not consistent, think about what you need to do to make the budget process fit with your organization and its culture. For dreaming, this is where we also really think about the long term, we think about the future, and we think of different scenarios. So this could include having discussions about how things might be changing. Maybe there could be leadership changes. Maybe there could be new staff positions. Maybe there's a need for a new office or a move or new pieces of equipment or other kinds of big investments that require longer term planning. So that's all what we see for the dreaming part of the participatory budget process. If we go to the next phase, which is planning, we see a real need to start with organizational level planning. So this will be driven probably by your strategic plan if you have one. So thinking about the budget that goes into all of the great things that you're trying to accomplish, the goals, the objectives that you have. At the planning stage, we're also going to look at the programmatic level as to the resources that are required for how you're going to get programs and offerings actually done. And then lastly, we cannot forget about operations because as you're doing your organizational planning, you also need to consider the administration, management, and staffing priorities that your organization has. And you'll want to include all of these different pieces in your participatory budget discussions, right? So the third phase that we go to is understanding and managing all of the information that you've just aggregated, right? So you really want to talk about how the money is going to come in. So what your revenue strategy is, as well as how the money is going to be utilized. So what are the expense estimates and plans with different costs that might be coming up, fixed and variable. And then lastly, there is an adjustment phase that happens with participatory budgets where there has to be a reality check. And I'll just admittedly tell you, I've been in situations where that reality check can be really hard, but it's important that it happens. And what I mean by that is there needs to be a time when you look at the finished budget and you make sure, first of all, that it reflects what is actually happening and what's planned, but it also needs to be pretty accurate, right? And so if there's a mismatch between what people are asking for in terms of the resources they need and then what's available, there needs to be some adjustments to make sure that the budget is balanced, right? We also suggest that there be time for or consideration for reforecasting. And right now, what we're seeing is many organizations are reforecasting their budget every 6 months. I have heard of groups that are reforecasting every 3 months because they're in a really big phase of change. And then the cycle begins again, right? And I think that point is just that the budget is a cycle. And it's important that you don't consider it as a static thing that you do once and you're done. It's constantly evolving. And you work with it to make sure that it gets better and better as you go. Okay, next slide. So what we've done so far is we have talked about what participatory budgeting is and why it's important. We just gave you a pretty detailed framework for how to think about a budget process, But how do we actually start? Well, I we suggest starting by keeping it really simple. Um, and when you're thinking about bringing more participation to your budget, just start by asking, well, what's the information that we really want to know to better inform the budget? Who do we want to engage in asking for this information? And how do we want to engage them? Those three questions. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the first one, which is what information might you want to get in a more participatory budget process? So focusing only on the organizational part of the planning. So that one square that was highlighted in red. Um, this is going to be information that relates to your organization's goals, objectives, and strategies, what you want to accomplish. And so we listed out some questions that we think might be important to ask, including which of the current activities or programs are contributing the most to the community's well-being? Are there any offerings that our community needs are not, that the community needs but are not being offered currently? And then also, is something changing in a way that will make next year or future years different, right? So these, again, are all key questions that Andrea and I are suggesting might be something that you want to start with. So next, we'll talk about, we have key questions for leadership. Okay, so in asking for information, there are also some key questions that you might want to specifically ask organizational leaders or others with a broader perspective about the organization, its successes, its challenges, and its needs. And for all of, so those questions might be, what does the organization need to thrive? Or what resources are needed to best serve our community in terms of funding, capital, training, staff? I think the key is that for each of these pieces of information you're asking for, as answers come in, you want to make sure that things are aligned with your organizational mission. The other thing is you really need to begin to ask in the moment, what are the costs involved? And what's the model for covering those costs? And this is really important. So I just want to take a second to emphasize that with a more participatory budget process, we're being intentional in talking about both the ideas, the plan, and the money, right? I think that in general, what I see is that in our sector, there is a desire to be more participatory, but I also think we sometimes leave it at tell me what you'd like, tell me what you need. But we really don't go into the part about money. So we're not asking, what do you think the cost would be? How do you think those costs should be covered? And I think ultimately that's really limited. That's really limiting for everybody involved. I do think that this is a tendency we have because it gets back to the earlier slide about it might be hard to talk about money. But, you know, it's really important to do because ultimately the participatory budget needs to link the ideas that everyone has to the money and to the business model for your organization in a realistic way. That's how it can be empowering. All right, so now that we've talked about the information and the key questions you might want to ask, Andrea will continue and talk to us about who might participate.
So, a number of people that we've brought up that we might want to have involved in the budget process. And if you have any additions to the list, I hope you'll add them in the chat. So who gets to participate in the budget process? Staff, leadership, board, community members, significant volunteers, significant and potential funders, also clients, the people that we serve. And please help us build this list by putting any suggestions you have in the chat. And then how do we ask for participation? We want to make participation accessible for folks. And we do that by talking with them in multiple ways, depending on who they are and how they and we think that we can best get the information that we want to inform our budget. So we could have small group discussions, we can have community meetings, we can do surveys. Some people might like their spreadsheets, and feedback forms to gather information from folks. It's really important to keep in mind as we're asking folks to that we approach the budget process with a lot of positivity and a genuine desire for their participation, and that we really work with them and our organizations to make the process more accessible for folks, and that we have a genuine interest in increasing our organizational transparency. And all of this will result in greater buy-in, more skill building, and just more open relationships with folks who will become, big champions, hopefully, for your organization, both internally and externally. There are lots of sources for information that we can draw upon in building our budgets. Jackie mentioned strategic plan. We can use metrics and evaluation tools that we already have, things like, the number of clients that we've served on a monthly basis, those kinds of things. Customer surveys are really helpful in gathering information about people's satisfaction or needs that people might see that we don't necessarily see. And then there might be research in the field and experiments that we might want to draw upon depending on your field. And if folks have any suggestions for other sources of information, we'd love it if you'd share them in the chat. We'll use this information in the future. Jackie's going to lead us through a short scenario that will help demonstrate how this can work.
Thanks, Andrea. So we, in thinking about how to really, I don't know, put some of these ideas to work, we came up with a 3-sentence case study because we thought, okay, let's just try to have a neutral way to talk about these ideas without necessarily talking about our own organizations. So I'm going to read the case study and then we'll go through and have a discussion about it. The case study is, you work with a food pantry. You've noticed an increase in the need for food and a decrease in organizational funding. How do you want to begin a conversation about the shifts in programming and in budgeting that might need to happen? And so the way that we'd like to open this up for discussion is by talking through, the 3 simple steps that we're suggesting as a starting place for thinking about your participatory budgeting. So the first step is, if you were in this situation, what questions would you want to ask? Who would you want to involve in asking? And what are the ways? How would you ask people to participate? So for example, would you think about doing a focus group or an online survey? And then also, in general, are there ways that you can think of that might make the conversation more comfortable or accessible? So I think what we'll do is maybe stop there with those 4 questions, and I'll just ask the group, as you think about the scenario that we just created, what are the questions that you would ask if you were in that situation? Who would you want to involve? And what are some of the ways that you would be interested in gaining participation in a budget process? And I'll read the case one more time because it was on the previous slide. So you work with a food pantry. You've noticed an increase in the need for food and a decrease in organizational funding. How do you want to begin a conversation about the shifts in programming and in budgeting that might need to happen? So I think we have 41 people. What I'll say is, if you have ideas about the questions to ask the people to involve or how to make the discussions more participatory, raise your Zoom hand and we'd love to hear from you. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I mean the first thing I would want to do, I think, is to validate what I'm seeing. Is the increase in demand, actually backed up by data that we're collecting on the people who use our services? Are similar organizations in our area also seeing the same trends? Um, and um, also, with the decrease in funding, I would go to, my organization's development department or equivalent and say, it seems like we have less money for X, Y, and Z. You Is that really what's going on, or is this is this just part of the funding cycle that we expect every year? That there's a dip, or is this something that is more long lasting and broader and is going to have more of an impact?
Yeah, thank you. I think those are great questions and really important information to start. I am curious if Mark or other participants have ideas of who would be involved in asking these questions. So, and Mark, you said for that last part, you would be asking development folks, but I'm curious for the other parts, if folks have ideas of who you would want to engage in gathering this information. Again, if you have ideas, please raise your Zoom hand. Go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry about that. My React is not showing a raise hand. It says play chime for raised hand, so I'm sorry. Um, so I would actually start with asking the programs team first what they actually need to be able to do in order to successfully run the food pantry and meet the needs of the people who are coming in, and then what creative ways they might have for us to be able to still serve the mission before going to the development department. Um, because once those things happen, then they can help inform the development department and what they can do. I also wonder if there are other organizations around that are doing similar work, and I would be connecting with them to see if they're seeing similar trends in their funding. Because is it a us problem as an organization, or is it a like systemic issue for all food pantries? Um, and then I think um I might then be going to the board to get their input on what sort of the priorities are of the organization. Because is it like we adjust how frequently people can come to use our services? Is it that we adjust how much people are receiving when they come for our services so we can still meet our mission? And then once we have all that information to be able to put that into numbers. I do think it's important to get feedback from the people who are receiving the services. Focus groups are important, but I think like even if you had a staff person that was asking questions as like food pantry is happening, to get feedback on the spot, because it's hard to get people to come to you to get information sometimes, depending on how like your relationship with the people you're serving.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate that. And I think Mark and Ashley, your responses really covered a wide range of ideas for who could be included and questions to ask. And I just want to bring in Julian, who had their hand raised as well. Julian?
Hi, I also had the problem where I couldn't figure out how to click the react thing.
Well,
But if you
welcome.
click on the heart instead of the arrow, then it shows the hand.
Okay.
Um, I think Ashley covered it actually, but I was going to say like thinking about your constituents and who is receiving the services. I work in the arts, so it's a little bit different, but asking like your collaborators and asking, the people who you're serving as part of your mission, like what is important. But I also realize that might be complicated because someone getting asked that question is likely going to think, oh, what are they going to cut? I worry. So that is a hard question sometimes, but I think it really is important still to get the on the ground information from the people that your mission is serving. Like, what is the priority? What is the most helpful things? What do you see yourself using the most?
Thank you. And and agree, and just want to mention to your point, Julian, again, when you're bringing more people to the table, you're bringing their own experiences with money to the table as well. And so, as someone who's involved in the budget process, there's a lot of things that need to be thought through and managed. And, what's the actual information that you would like to ask for? And how are you going to use that? Because you want to be accountable, especially when you're asking people who are clients or otherwise receiving services. You want to make sure that if they are generous enough to give you information, you're going to use that information to the best of your ability. Celine, I see your hand up also.
Yeah, the only question I would add is how quickly do we need to make a decision? What is the runway available? And I don't really know who you go to ask that question. Might be a combination of the accounting finance department to see what are the burn rate, cash on hand, those sorts of questions, and then to either the leadership or the board as to what are minimum parameters.
Yes, agreed. That's a really important point. And I also think it's part of that reality check that needs to happen when you're doing a participatory budget of making sure that the information you're putting together in a budget makes sense given the reality that you're facing. I think at this point, I want to shift us away from the group discussion just so that we can open up the floor for more general discussions about the participatory budget process. So I'll turn
Yeah,
it over to Andrea.
I agree. I'm just going to put these questions up here. These are the discussion questions about this process that we just went through together. And I love all of your questions were terrific, and all of the ways that you framed the teasing apart the scenario were great. They're exactly the kinds of questions that can help engage people in a participatory budget process, and you led us through that process really nicely with your questions. If you can just type in the chat for us, what was one thing that was surprising or interesting or helpful about this process, and what ideas do you have from this discussion that you might bring back to the organization that you represent? We will lead into some of the questions that folks asked us with their registrations, because there were some great questions from that process. And I'm going to leave these up so you can type your responses in the chat, so we'll have them for the future. So there was a question that came in before with the class registrations about tips on how to bring people who haven't historically been involved in the budgeting process, board, kind of staff that work directly with clients and others into the process without overwhelming them. And we like that question. We get it pretty frequently. And so a couple of tips that might work within your own organizations. One is to start by relating budgeting back to something that is understood, and potentially even something personal, right? Like balancing a checkbook or managing your life on a nonprofit salary, right? And So, and the other is to have folks think about a very discrete piece of the budget that they might easily relate to. And for example, with the food pantry, that could be something like food, or it could be something like even just the bags that we put the food in so that people can take it home with them. So make it really small and something that they can easily understand. And some of the other examples that we have for things that people might easily relate to in different fields are translation services, office supplies, or transportation costs, right? And then another suggestion is to consider having small group discussions with groups that are based on program expertise or job functions, so that if you have a team, if the food pantry is part of larger programs, larger organization, have the food pantry program working together as a team to unravel what the priorities are and what is going on and how to budget for the items that are under their management and care over the course of the year. So that was one. Jackie, you want to take the next one?
Sure. I am not, could you, what is the
Oh,
question?
I can do it. It was, someone was particularly interested in participatory budgeting processes and transparency with staff. What are the best ways to include staff in the budget process, and what are some of the budget process and transparency best practices?
Yeah, that's such a juicy question, and thank you for asking it. Whoever asked that one. I would just say we know that transparency might be a goal. Again, getting back to your organization's values, it might be that transparency is a goal. But at the same time, there are parts of the budget that you may or may not want to include in discussions with your stakeholders. I do think that the obvious example is just with salaries and compensation. Most organizations choose to keep that private and confidential and not have it be part of a participatory budget process. That's not universal. There are some groups that do, but I would say most don't. And I think that that's okay. I think the key is just getting back to what I said before, which is like you really want to ask people for the right information and make sure that you are accountable to them when you're asking for that information. And accountability means sharing how their information is going to be used and actually using it and putting it into practice. Andrea, I'll stop there, but do you have more you want to add?
No, and I just wanted to do a check. We've got 1 minute left. Is there a question in the chat that we want to take? Or do I want to go to I have a third question.
Yeah, I think time. I think wrapping up. There really is not a question right now in the
In the
chat.
chat.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a question that was submitted earlier about how to collaboratively manage the budget process throughout the fiscal year. And I'll just quickly say, as we talked about, we see the budget as being a very continual, iterative process. And so revisiting where we are with things on a regular basis is an important part of managing the budget over the course of the year, and sharing those little pieces like the food pantry programs progress and outcomes with each program is a really important piece of that throughout the year. So here's where we are with food expenditures. And also just engaging people in thinking about how to create the revenue to do the things that we want to do is another way of checking in periodically with the teams and building their capacity to understand the ins and the outs. So I feel like this is a big topic, and we didn't have as much time as we would have liked to answer your questions and to have more of a discussion. But we're so grateful for you taking the time out of your day to be here with us and to share your thoughts. And we really, really encourage you to stay in touch with us, support Nonprofit Net's work, because they've been terrific hosts and wonderful folks to work with, and they're giving a lot of value with these webinars. And thanks for having us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea and Jackie. Thank you so much. Fascinating and provocative and helpful presentation. And thank you all in the audience for being here, making the time. Hope you got a lot out of it. Please complete the quick survey that will show up when you leave. And let's stay in touch and perhaps see you next month. And thank you, everyone, so much.